Do you love your creative push? Consider taking 2 minutes to leave a nice review on iTunes. By telling how the show has helped you, you'll help other people find it so they can help them too. If you need some simple instructions on how to do it, head to yourcreativepush.com/review. Thank you in advance for leaving a review, and thank you again to those who already have. Your Creative Push, episode 223.
I think you just need to, take whatever bad thing comes at you, and you have to channel it into something positive.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Blake McFarland. Blake is a recycled materials artist who used recycled rubber tires to build amazing lifelike sculptures of tire animals. In addition to his tire sculptures, Blake is a painter, and he also creates murals out of recycled wine corks. In addition to all this, Blake is also a pitcher in the Toronto Blue Jays organization, which is so cool, man. Blake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, of course, man. Glad to have you. So when I was writing that intro that I just read, I kept going back and forth trying to decide which thing to put first, Blake the baseball player or Blake the artist. So I was wondering, do you ever have that dilemma on kind of which identity to put first?
It's kind of funny you say that because, that's the first thing people always ask me is, who do you identify yourself as, a baseball player, an artist? And for me at this point right now, I think it's kind of equally both. I think if you were to ask me a couple years ago, it would be more baseball because art has kind of just progressed more and more throughout my career so far. So as of right now, I'd identify with both of them equally.
Very cool. And I imagine it's one of those things where you have the baseball season where you're fully concentrated, and then you have the off season where you can kind of concentrate on all your other interests.
Yeah, definitely. It's very, very different. Baseball is very much so outside of the art world and vice versa. So I'm almost a completely different person during my baseball season where it's 100% baseball games every day for 6-7 months. And then the off season where I have my 4 or 5 months to just do art and pursue that passion. So it is completely different, and it makes for an exciting year.
Yeah, for sure. But during the baseball season, then when you said it's every day, just going at it, are you also kind of delving into your art a little bit, or is it just kind of something you have to think about and kind of write your ideas down and then wait for the off season?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So during my baseball season, I don't do any kind of art besides possibly just some sketches or simple drawings. But it is where I do a lot of the planning for the art side of the off season. So I'll answer a lot of emails. I'll bring up different ideas to what I can do. And basically I fill up my entire off season with art projects during my baseball season. So that it does show a little bit in there.
Yeah, and I imagine you're probably chopping at the bit to get to it, because I know that your tire sculptures do take a really long time. Is that right?
Yeah, they do. Normally, one life-size sculpture takes up to a month for me to complete, so there's really no chance I'd be able to do that during a baseball season.
Oh my God. All right. And I want to get back into the tire sculptures, but maybe you could kind of take us down the path of how you started with the art.
So art in general, I started... I was always the doodler. I always used to draw little sketches in class when I was young, but it never really came to me as an actual career path until I want to say 18 years old. I was in my parents' house, and my mom had a painting of this koi fish in the downstairs, one of the bedrooms. So I've passed this fish my whole life. I never really thought anything of it. And I go to my mom one day and I'm like, Mom, this koi fish is a terrible painting. I could do something way better than this. So sure enough, that day, I went to the hobby shop and I got some paints, some acrylics, and I just started painting. And my very first painting, I did a oceanscape, and it ended up turning out really well. And one of a family friend wanted to buy it, so I sold my first painting. So that's kind of where art first came into my life. It was actually being an acrylic painter, and I did a lot of landscaping. From then on, I signed my first professional baseball contract in 2011, and that off season is when art really started to take off. It's when being a baseball player, you really can't get a good job in the off season because no one's going to hire you knowing that you're going to leave them in 4 or 5 months. So it's tough to get a legitimate job that way. So for me, my thought process was, okay, I'm going to try art because I have the full 5 or 6 months to do this, and then I can sell as much as I can, and that'll be my off-season job. So that's really where the painting came in. And then from there, it kind of just translated into tires, into corks, all recycled materials, and it just kind of translated from there.
Yeah, I really like that idea of, I guess, like, it's kind of like the baseball season's like usually 7-ish months, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like almost like a complete like half and half split. So
Yeah.
I like that idea of being able to like devote the other half of the time to like that. And I love how both of the things kind of took off at the same time. Like when you signed your contract is also like when the art like really kind of took off. That's so cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So take us into the idea of getting into like the tire sculptures, because your paintings are like really cool, but these tire sculptures, for anybody who hasn't seen them, definitely head to the show notes page today to check out the art, because it's like they're so cool, so massive, and just so very, very unique. So like what gave you the idea to kind of start these?
So it was actually pretty random. So my wife lived in St. Louis, and we lived next to this playground, and they had a bunch of like big old tractor tires. They were spread out into like a snake or some kind of serpent animal on the playground for kids to play on. So that was really what kind of struck my idea is there's tires you see on the side of the road every single day that are just sitting there, that are discarded materials that take up their space in landfills and are easily accessible. So that's really where my first inspiration came to me is, tires are something that I can possibly use for a sculpture. And from there, it kind of just went to the drawing boards because I had no idea on where to start on that. And it's a very long process on how I started. So I didn't know exactly what tires I wanted to use. So the first thing I did was I went to an auto mechanic shop, a body shop, and I just took 4 or 5 tires from them. They're going to the dump anyway. They actually have to pay to get them recycled. So I was doing them a favor. They wanted to give me around 100, but I only took 4 to start. So when I first started, I thought, all right, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to cut these up and then try to mold them into a figure, and there we go. And sure enough, it's a lot harder than that. I found out the hard way that car tires are all steel reinforced with thousands and thousands of little fibers that make them nearly impossible to cut through. I tried 4 or 5 different rotary blades that broke. I tried a Sawzall, which is a really, really big, powerful saw. Couldn't really cut through them. So from there, I knew I had to go back to the drawing board and figure something else out because car tires were actually not going to work. So from there, I went to motorcycle tires, found out the same thing. They're all steel reinforced. And to where I finally came upon bicycle tires. So all my sculptures are basically made with bicycle tires, with an exception of a couple that I did at the Cotton Bowl. So that's kind of how the whole tire thing started, and I found what tires I needed, and then it kind of just went from there into sculpting with them.
And I imagine that there's still like a lot more steps that you're not even getting to, because like I would imagine that it's really hard to shape each tire to like each, because like they're so perfectly formed. Like speaking of the Cotton Bowl ones, like the Western Michigan Bronco is like perfectly formed. Like, so how much cutting do you have to do for each piece, like to fit like the muscles of the animal?
Yeah, so on most of my sculptures, I'm using actually a polyurethane foam core. So I basically have this foam core that I'm then wrapping, weaving, and securing the tires around. So it's not 100% only tires. There's some armature in there, there's some steel, some wood, and then polyurethane foam, which is a really easy foam to carve with. And that's kind of the base of my sculptures.
And so then how did Goodyear reach out to you? Because you did these 2, like I said, the 2 amazing sculptures, the Bucky the Badger for Wisconsin, and then a very different, the Bronco for Western Michigan. How did Goodyear reach out to you? How did they find you? And then what was that process like?
So Goodyear found me just on my website. I got an email randomly one day saying it was Goodyear, and they just thought of this idea of possibly turning these sculptures into the Cotton Bowl mascots. And obviously I was extremely excited. I thought this was just an amazing experience for me to team up with Goodyear, obviously a huge tire company. So it was really a dream come true being able to produce these sculptures for them. The hardest thing about it was the teams weren't actually decided for the Cotton Bowl until 18 days prior to the game. So I didn't know what I was going to be sculpting until 18 days before the game. So I had basically 18 days to finish 2 larger than life sculptures, which would normally take me up to 2 months to create. So it was a very hectic time.
Did they know that going in, that like, did you tell them it usually does take me like double the time you're asking for?
For sure. I mean, I let them know. I told them that, normally this takes me 2 months, but I mean, if you guys really, really want this, I can make it happen. And it's the first time I actually hired 3 or 4 other people to actually help me, mostly with the cutting of the tires, because the longest part of these sculptures, the most time, is actually just hand cutting every little shred of tire. So that actually helped me a lot and save a lot of time with people helping me cut the tires.
For sure. Yeah, I imagine that kind of a project is just like super overwhelming. So how much did you sleep during that time?
Not a lot at all. Not a lot of sleep. It was as soon as I wake up in the morning until I go to bed. It was a tough time, but I mean, looking back, it was a great experience, and I loved working with them.
That's cool. And then what was the experience like of like people being able to see it and like you being able to see people seeing it, and then it just like kind of having a almost national stage?
Yeah, it was such a cool experience because like a couple other people have never seen my work actually see it like in person. And for the most part, everyone wants to go up there and they don't know what it's made of yet. So they have to get really close, and then everyone, the first thing they want to do is touch it or see how these things are connected, because I actually hide the way they're all intertwined. So you're not going to see any bolts or any screws out in the open. So it does look like it's just kind of melted on the sculptures, but it's really not. I hide everything to make it appear that it's almost melted or woven in.
Yeah, I imagine it's one of those things where it's like you see the images and it's like really impressive and cool, but seeing it in person is like a completely different thing.
Yeah, it really is. And I love watching people's reaction of seeing it.
Yeah. Now, I was wondering, like, what kind of strategy do you have for, like, when you do have, like, the time to get to your art during the off season? You're like, all right, you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, I'm going to do art today. Like, how do you choose, like, what type of art you do? Because you really do a ton of stuff, like, besides the sculptures. We didn't even get to the wine cork murals yet, and then we've talked about painting. But you also have these, like, on your Instagram, like, these amazing stipple drawings. You just do a ton of stuff, so how do you kind of decide when you wake up or like get to your art, like what exactly you're going to do in that day? Is it just kind of whatever you feel like, or do you have like kind of a method?
Honestly, to tell you the truth, it's kind of what I feel like. It's what I feel like, and then what kind of time I have during that day. If it's a fully open off season and I know I'm going to have a month, then I'd probably shoot for a tire sculpture, something that I can do on a larger scale in that time. Most of my drawings and paintings are actually when I have only a short period of time. I'm bored and I want to get something done. So it's really kind of time dependent. I'm not a guy that likes a lot of downtime, and I always think that if I'm watching TV, I could be doing something else more productive. So that's when I do a majority of my artwork, actually.
Very cool. And do you kind of foresee like the tire thing as being your kind of niche moving forward?
Definitely. It seems to draw people's interest the most out of all the things I do. And I love creating them, so I'm going to continue to do that until who knows when.
So was there any type of hesitancies whenever you got this idea to, like, I know like you told us the story about like how you got the idea to do it, but then once you got the idea for the tire sculptures, was there any kind of hesitancy to do it once it was hard to cut it, and it was like, you try all these different saws to cut it down, and I'm sure that you had a couple that didn't kind of pan out exactly how you wanted it. Like, what kind of made you push through that?
Definitely. Well, the first thing even before that is when I told my wife I wanted to make a tire sculpture, she just kind of laughed at me and thought it was nothing. And then, I told the same thing to all my friends and my parents. I'm like, guys, I really want to try these tire sculptures. And they all just laugh at me, having no idea what I meant. So that was kind of the first resistance that I got. And then it was kind of, all right, I'm going to show you guys what I'm thinking of. So my first sculpture was actually, it was a little jaguar, and it took me right around 2 months to complete. And this thing is small. This thing is maybe 3 feet by 1.5 foot tall. I mean, obviously the hardest part was actually figuring out what tires to use. And then not only that is how to basically make kind of muscle structure look to it, and then get the finer details with the face. I mean, it was a ton of trial and error. It ended up turning out pretty good, and we kind of went from there. That kind of started everything.
So one of the things that I promote in this podcast a lot is when you get ideas like that, especially like ideas that are out there, not like, oh, honey, I want to be a painter, or honey, I want to, be a writer, or I want to learn how to play guitar or whatever. But when you come up with an idea like, I want to build tire sculptures, and I think it's the most important thing to do is to kind of get that idea out there and to tell people about it. So then whenever people do like either laugh at you or kind of brush you off, I think that for most people, that will be enough to just kind of stop them, and they'll be like, oh, you're right. That's a bad idea. So what I really love about you is that the fact that you're like, no, screw that. I'm going to show you what I mean. You know what I mean? Because sometimes words can't get you to describe exactly what you have in your head. So like, bravo to you for being like, screw that. I'm going to show them, even though it's going to take 2 months. I'm going to show them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, of course. So are there any other type of, like you talked about that kind of resistance and like the starting it off, and also kind of not necessarily having the support of the people around you? I'm sure you have their support, but not like them getting it right away. Are there any type of other resistances that you have dealt with or you continue to deal with?
Well, yes. One resistance actually right now, this is outside of art, is baseball. Last year I actually had shoulder surgery, and I was out the entire year. And it was supposed to be the biggest year of my career. I just recently got added to the 40-man roster. And so I went from, thinking I was going to potentially make a big league roster to my season's over in spring training. So that was obviously a big blow to me. And then this year, actually right now, I'm still rehabbing from that shoulder surgery and hoping to get out there. So very unrelated to the sculptures, but a big resistance is going to be coming back from this injury and trying to perform in the next month and the rest of this season. And things are looking good for that right now.
Well, good. So does that physically affect you with the art? Because it is kind of like an all-encompassing type of physical thing to create these sculptures. So does that physically affect you?
Yes and no. It's actually, my shoulder's fine when I'm sculpting. It's only throwing the baseball where I feel the pain. But actually what rehabbing all last year did for me on the art side of things, I had more time basically because I was rehabbing in the morning, and I was home by basically 1 every day. So I actually did a lot of drawings and paintings, and then a lot of different emails to potential clients and trying to get that in order for the off season. So I actually spent a lot more time on art last year because I was rehabbing.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was like, does it physically affect you, and then does it mentally affect you? Because we kind of already talked about how both of your careers started to take off at the same point. And I know that for me, if something bad happens at work, I just get kind of depressed, but like I'll come home and I'll just not want to do anything. You know what I mean? Like what happens at work, I sometimes bring home with me and into like my passions. Like, so I know that I shouldn't be recording like a solo episode because I'm like down, you know what I mean? So like sometimes you can put things off. So would you say that it was the opposite for you? Like the seesaw of that, like it gave you more time to do your art, and then were you kind of more like driven?
It actually, yeah. You kind of nailed it. It really is almost opposite for me, where if my baseball career is taking a little bit of a hit, I'm going to go more towards the art side of things while I can't do the baseball at that moment, like last year. To whereas maybe if I have a sculpture not coming out very well during the off season, I don't like the way it's looking, I just stop and I'll actually go to the gym and kind of get things off my mind, which actually helps for the baseball year because I'm basically working out, training for baseball. So it kind of relieves me on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and would you have any advice for anybody that's listening that maybe is like me, where it's like something that happens in real life, whether it's family or work or friends or whatever, fill in the blank, where that can kind of get you down? How do you push through that? Like, do you have to be a professional athlete to be able to kind of push through that? Or yeah,
No, I think you just need to, take whatever bad thing comes at you and you have to channel it into something positive. It can be whatever you want, whatever passion you want. If you have a bad day at work and you're a painter, maybe you produce the best painting you've ever done that night. If you have a bad day, doing something else or some kind of family problem, maybe you go work out and you're someone that can work out and sweat out the kind of pain and distress. And I think, channeling something into a positive way is really a huge thing and a huge part of getting over it.
Yeah, I think the takeaway there is to use the creative passion as a kind of form of therapy.
Exactly.
Maybe it's too soon, but as a rehab.
For sure, because most of the time when you're writing or someone's doing art, you're not thinking of anything but the task at hand, and that's kind of what you need to get your mind off other things.
Absolutely. Now, would you say that this is probably like I like to ask people for their best and worst moments. Would you say that this is like one of your worst moments as far as like, I guess, your baseball career?
So, baseball career, yeah, last year was definitely very, very tough being, the high from just getting placed on the 40-man roster to, season-ending injury. That was definitely a very low part in my baseball career. It's also a high part though in the off season because I had the biggest art project I've done to date with Goodyear. So it kind of evened out in the end. But yeah, you're always going to have those ups and downs. It's kind of what you do next that will distinguish how the outcome is.
Yeah. So often when I ask that question, the worst moment typically goes right into the best moment. And it's funny how those two things are intertwined. So whenever you are kind of in a hard time, whether it's in life or with your creative passion, be looking for that best moment or be looking for a way to pivot, to turn it into a good thing.
Exactly. You said it right.
Do you have a greatest inspiration?
Greatest inspiration? The Dos Equis man is pretty cool guy. He does it all.
There's a new one now, though.
I know. You know what? I'm not a big fan of the new one.
Me either.
The other guy was the man, and he's a guy. He's an interesting man. But you know what? I get inspired from too many people to name. I don't really look up just to one person. I look up to 10, 15 different peoples in all different areas, whether it's baseball, art, just leadership, all of that. So there's really a big community of people that I look up to.
Very cool. And I can't let you go without talking about your cork. What would you call it? Like cork art, cork murals?
Yeah, cork or recycled cork art.
Yeah, I like that. So how did that start?
So that started kind of just before the tire sculptures got started. I saw there's a couple other people that do murals out of cork art, and I just thought it was one of the coolest things I've seen. I live in San Jose, California, just 40 minutes away from Napa Valley, where they have just an abundance amount of wine corks. So what I ended up doing was just going to all these vineyards and restaurants and collecting all these corks and then basically just making these murals. But the difficult part that I didn't know until I did it was the hardest thing to do was the frame of the picture. I actually had to hand make all those frames because it had to be basically an inch thick and it had to hold and support all these corks. So it had to hold, a couple 100 pounds for each sculpture.
Yeah, you don't really think of that because a cork is so light, but I guess hundreds of them or even up to 1,000, right? Really adds up.
Yeah, the large ones, I think the largest one I did was the American flag, and that has over 2,000 corks, and that piece is probably 150 pounds.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So then is it really as easy as just going to the vineyards or going to restaurants and being like, hey, you got any corks? Like they just save them?
Some places did and others didn't. I actually ended up going to probably around 50 to 60 restaurants weekly to try and get these corks. And obviously I'd have to call ahead of time and see if they could save them for me. And that was a lot of work in itself, just collecting all those corks.
Very cool. So Blake, it is time for the final push. And this is where we ask you to reach to the microphone and just grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their creative passion, whatever it may be.
I kind of just think if you have any downtime at all, if you're watching TV or if you're just sitting there on your phone, I think a big thing for me that helped me is take advantage of that downtime and really try to create something with that downtime, whatever your passion is. It could be writing, painting, sculpting, whatever it be. Don't take downtime for granted and really create something that can last a lifetime and last forever in just that time that you would have been watching TV. I think it all really starts from there.
Exactly, especially if you use that excuse of, I don't have enough time. Pencil down what you're doing throughout the day. Like, you can find 10 minutes a day or an hour, up to an hour a day of just like found time, or even sacrifice a little bit of sleep. But you're right, it's, be a producer, not a consumer.
Exactly. 10 minutes. If you have 10 minutes a day, at the end of the year, you could have yourself a full 400-page novel.
Exactly, which is an amazing thing that I don't think people realize. It's like all those microseconds throughout your day really add up.
Yeah, for sure.
Blake, man, thank you so much for coming on the show and for giving us that push today, dude.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And you can find Blake on his website, which is blakemcfarland.com. And on Instagram, he is Blake_McFarland. We'll have all that linked up, though, at the show notes page today at yourcreativepush.com/Blake McFarland. Blake, thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh, man, that was so cool to be able to talk to Blake. And I just want you to know that I did get his permission to have such a corny title for this episode, Strike Out Your Creative Blocks. I felt like I really needed to ask permission for that kind of level of corniness. But two really big things that, for me personally, I could relate to so much from talking with him. And the first being the idea of having two different identities and how you can balance them. For me, as a poker dealer and a writer, those things have nothing to do with each other. So it was really interesting to hear his take on being a baseball player and also being a artist, because I think that those two things, kind of like we were saying in the episode, are two different circles in the Venn diagram that don't really intersect a lot. And it can get confusing. It can get difficult to explain to people that you have these two different sides to you, these two different identities. And I think that many of you might have that problem too, where your identity is so tied in with what you do for a living that it's difficult to not only explain to other people like the creative passion that you have, but to explain to yourself that passion and to give yourself the permission to get to your creative passion when you get home from that job that you have defined yourself by all day. But it's people like Blake that give me inspiration that, yes, you can be a baseball player and be an artist. You can be a sculptor. You can be, a teacher and a singer. You can be a soccer mom and a sculptor, or you can be a lawyer and you can also be a comedian. Or if you already are pretty confident in a creative passion that you're doing, you can also pursue another creative dream. Like you can be a painter and a musician, a writer and a dancer, or in the case of somebody like Mike Coos, who was our last guest, be an illustrator / graphic designer / web designer, and also have this kind of side passion as a photographer. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, you can always start defining yourself as this other thing that you do, this other creative passion that you do in your spare time. Why not? The next time somebody asks you what you do, tell them your creative passion first. And then the other thing that Blake brought up was the idea of people not understanding what the hell you're talking about when you say you want to create tire sculptures or whatever it is that you want to do. I can relate to this so much because of my Words Plus Music videos. The thing that I was so scared to tell people about or to try to explain to them before I had even created it, that it held me back for a couple years, which led me to create this podcast because I didn't want any of you to have that same block. But I love what he did. People didn't understand it or they laughed at him. And he was just like, okay, I'm just going to show them what I mean. And even if it takes 2 months to create that thing, and even if it is a much smaller version of what you anticipated, just show them what you mean. Create it, bring it out into the world, and show yourself what you mean as well. Give yourself that proof of concept so that you can give other people that proof of concept and then go forward. I think that was super inspiring from Blake. And, whatever it is that you want to do, go out there and get to it. No matter what you have defined yourself by previously, just get to it. On Thursday's show, we have Marta Neal. Marta is a very talented Spanish artist who specializes in concept art and matte painting. She has a very badass, unique style. I had a lot of fun talking with her about the creative process and her journey, and she has a lot to say about some of her resistances as well as how she developed her own style. You can find her on Instagram as Marta Neal, MartaNael, or you can find links to all her stuff on today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/223. But that is for you on Thursday, so hopefully today you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next time if you need the push. Again, I love you all, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.